Gracious God, we offer thanks for the ways that you surround us with your care, your concern, your compassion, and your love. As we look more deeply into your word today, help us to learn about that compassion and love and the ways that you hold us, even as we study difficult passages. We offer this time to you, and we ask that your Spirit guide our deliberations. We offer ourselves in Jesus' name and for Jesus' sake. Amen. Amen. Okay, so I had mentioned in our first session that these Psalms of Lament, that there are more Psalms of Lament than any other kind of psalm in Scripture. And here is the beginning of, in fact, wait, let me go back. Because I want to say, we also ended last week's session with Psalm 44, which was an appeal to the story of God's faithfulness. You may remember that the focus of that psalm was, you did this for us in the past, why aren't you doing it for us in the future? Okay? Remember the promises that you made. It was a communal lament. And I think it's not too much of a stretch to say that this is the kind of thing that drives people to prayer. This sense something is off, something is out of whack. And there are lots of examples of Psalms of Lament, not only in the book of Psalms, but in other places. But most of today we're going to focus on this, which is most familiar to most Christians. Let's read, we don't need to read the superscription. Let's read those two verses together. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? O my God, I cry by day, and you do not answer, but night, but find no rest. Raise your hand if you know where that psalm appears in the New Testament. Where does it appear, Veronica?
Well, when Christ was on the cross.
Yeah, this is said to be spoken by Jesus on the cross. Now, question here, was this psalm written to predict Jesus' situation? It's more likely that it was known by Jesus and quoted in his situation of desperation. The Psalms were used by individuals in times of crisis. People experiencing personal difficulty or crisis or despair needed a way to express that to God. In the earliest times, remember this, in the earliest times, really the only avenue to God, the only way to get God's attention was sacrifice. There was no other institutional mechanism, okay? We're together every Sunday, but I'll give a sad example. The day after Father George's death, we had an emergency vestry meeting. And after that emergency vestry meeting, we gathered in the chapel for prayer because we were in crisis as a congregation. And I imagine others of you have been in situations where you turn to prayer in a time of crisis, sometimes as an individual, but sometimes as a community. One of my colleagues in New Jersey told the story of when a high school kid who was killed in a car accident, word got out. He said, well, maybe I'll just open the church for prayer and, that will be comforting to people. Well, he opened the church to prayer, and hundreds of people showed up thinking there was going to be some sort of pre-funeral event. But my point is, we have this avenue to God that was different in the past. We have this, I'll call it an institutional mechanism. Let's take a look at the story of Hannah. And maybe we could just start with Doug and just go around. If you don't want to read, just say pass. But let's read, say paragraph by paragraph, because this is kind of a long story, and it do go on. But this is very helpful in terms of getting this in context. Okay? So yes, there are about a half a dozen copies. Okay, Doug, why don't you start for us? Read the first paragraph of the story of Hannah.
The story of Hannah. There once was a man who lived in Ramathaim. He was descended from the old Zuph family in Ephraim Hills. His name was Jeroboam, his grandfather Elihu, and his great-grandfather Tohu. He had 2 wives. The first was Hannah, and the second was Peninnah.
Wait. Read that last couple of sentences again.
He had 2 wives.
He what? Read that again.
He had 2 wives.
Just
You can
read
have
to
4
the
wives,
end.
you know. 4 better, 4 worse.
Right. That would be 8, I think.
16, actually.
Finish the paragraph.
He had 2 wives. The first was Hannah. The second was Peninnah. Peninnah had children. Hannah did not.
This is an aside, but I think this is an important aside. Here we are in the Old Testament with one of the heroes of the Old Testament, and he had 2 wives. There are lots of people in this world, Christians, who claim to know what God's notion of family values is. That's baloney. He had 2 wives. The point is this idea, 1 husband, 1 wife forever, only a man and a woman couple, that is a modern construction.
Look at Solomon.
Yeah.
He was busy.
Yeah, he really was. I mean, and by modern I say, since the last 1,000 years or so. This is a modern construction that has been become a sort of an idol. 2 wives. Well, let's see what happens with these 2 wives. Ken.
Every year this man went from his hometown up to Shiloh to worship and offer a sacrifice to God of the angel armies. Eli and his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, served as the priests of God there. When Elkanah sacrificed, he passed helpings from the sacrificial meal around to his wife Peninnah and all her children. But he always gave an especially generous helping to Hannah because he loved her so much, and because God had not given her children. But her rival wife taunted her cruelly, rubbing it in and never letting her forget that God had not given her children. This went on year after year. Every time she went to the sanctuary of God, she could expect to be taunted. Hannah was reduced to tears and had no appetite.
Oh, family values, huh? Jeff?
Oh, so read now is what you want to do.
Her husband Elkanah said, "Oh, Hannah, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? And why are you so upset? Am I not of more worth to you than 10 sons?" So Hannah ate. Then she pulled herself together, slipped away quietly, and entered the sanctuary. The priest Eli was on duty at the entrance of God's temple in the customary seat. Crushed in soul, Hannah prayed to God and cried inconsolably. Then she made a vow.
Okay, who'll read the vow? Adrian? Carol?
They're skipping, so.
Oh, you're skipping. Okay.
O God of the angel armies, if you'll take a good hard look at my pain, if you quit neglecting me and go into action for me by giving me a son, I'll give him completely, unreservedly to you. I'll set him apart for a life of holy discipline. Wow.
It so happened that as she continued in prayer before God, Eli was watching her closely. Hannah was praying in her heart, silently. Her lips moved, but no sound was heard. Eli jumped to the conclusion that she was drunk. He approached her and said, "You're drunk. How long do you plan to keep this up? Sober up, woman."
Okay, this is what I was saying about the institutional mechanism. The sacrifice was the way that you communicated with God, the way you got God's attention. And here, she's doing something extraordinary. She is approaching God directly in her own words. I mean, to us, the vision of a woman praying silently, probably moving her lips a little, we wouldn't think anything strange about that if we went into a church or a chapel or cathedral and saw such a thing. But in that place, in that temple, in that time, to see such a thing was so extraordinary that Eli was convinced, yeah, she's off her rocker. I mean, she's had too many martinis, this lady. Get out of here. We don't need drunks around here. Okay? That's really important to understand where the story is going and the place of Psalms in human contact with God. David.
Hannah said, "Oh no, sir, please. I'm a woman broken-hearted. I haven't been drinking, not a drop of wine or beer. The only thing I've been pouring out is my heart, pouring it out to God. Don't for a moment think that I'm a bad woman. It's because I'm so desperately unhappy and in such pain that I've stayed here so long."
Okay. Jackie?
Eli answered her, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel give you what you have asked of him."
"Think well of me and pray for me," she said, and went on her way. Then she ate heartily, her face radiant.
Up before dawn, they worshipped God and returned home to Ramah. Elkanah slept with Hannah, his wife, and God began making the necessary arrangements in response to what she had asked.
Go on.
Before the year was out, Hannah had convinced and given birth to a son. She named him Samuel, explaining, "I asked God for him."
When Elkanah next took his family on their annual trip to Shiloh to worship God, offering sacrifices and keeping his vow, Hannah didn't go. She told her husband, "After the child is weaned, I'll bring him myself and present him before God, and that's where he'll stay for good."
Elkanah said to his wife, "Do what you think is best. Stay home until you have weaned him. Yes, let God complete what he has begun."
Okay. And can you finish for us, Ivan?
No.
Okay. Let's go back this way. Doug, finish up for us. You guys don't seem to have papers.
So she did. She stayed home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Then she took him up to Shiloh, bringing also the makings of a generous sacrificial meal, prize bull, flour, and wine. The child was so young to be sent off.
They first butchered the bull, then brought the child to Eli. Hannah said, "Excuse me, sir, would you believe that I'm the very woman who is standing before you at this very spot, praying to God? I prayed for this child, and God gave me what I asked for. And now I have dedicated him to God. He's dedicated to God for life. Then and there, they worshiped God.
Okay. Before her prayer, Hannah had come with her family to the temple to worship. And this prayer that she offers is like a psalm of lament. This is how a psalm of complaint would have been used. This is the context. This is where it came from. They go to temple, make a sacrifice to get God's attention, and then pray. This is what I have to, now that I have your attention now, this is what I want to pray. Sacrifice and prayer are intertwined. Since that Old Testament time, those things have been disentwined or disentangled. So Hannah's prayer is answered, her psalm of lament is answered, and in the next chapter we get Hannah's psalm, or Hannah's psalm, which is a psalm. It just doesn't happen to be in the book of Psalms. This is from 2 Samuel chapter 2 at the beginning. Let's take a look and see what Hannah prayed and said, reading together. My heart exalts in the Lord. My strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your victory. There is no holy one like the Lord, no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. Who was Hannah's enemy?
The other wife.
The other wife was her enemy?
She was very jealous.
She was jealous. Any other thoughts? Could her enemy have been that internal voice that says, you are not you are not a person of worth. You are not a person of value because you don't have children. Could that have been the enemy? I think that's a legitimate way of reading this Psalm of Hannah. Has anyone ever heard this story before? It's not in our current lectionary. The Anglican Church has 2 lectionaries, and we're using the first one where the Old Testament lesson sort of reflects some of the meaning and themes of the gospel. In the second lectionary, the Old Testament lessons completely ignore the gospel, and you have another series of Old Testament stories, the wisdom literature, etc. And over the course of 3 years, you get basically the whole biblical story. The problem is, if you read something like this and then read some story about what Jesus said to his disciples, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So I've used both in my years of preaching, and that's why part of the reason why this story is familiar, because it comes up in the other lectionary. Okay, anyway, in none of these Psalms of complaint, in none of the Psalms of complaint do we have the suggestion that the person is in trouble of his own fault. There is not the sense in the Psalms of complaint that the difficulty is a punishment for sin. These laments are simply a reflection of the human condition. Life is hard. Difficult things happen to us. unexplainably difficult things happen to us. And we can complain about it and lament our situation, but don't go around thinking God is punishing me because I have sinned. Jesus never preached that theology. There is an appeal to divine justice in the typical psalm of complaint. I've been crying out and you've been ignoring me. I deserve attention. It's an appeal to mercy and compassion. It's almost like, in this sacrifice, the psalmist is buttering up God, not just getting God's attention, but sort of flattering God. We'll see that as we continue this morning. We're back to this Psalm of Lament, Psalm 22, and most of the rest of what we do today is going to be based on Psalm 22 because it's so important. The structure of this psalm is carefully thought out, down to the smallest details. We can assume, because it's so carefully written, that over the years, over the centuries, this work of literature was reworked. It was an older psalm, or part of an older psalm, or older psalms put together. We're also going to notice a very unusual conclusion. Most psalms of lament end how?
With praise, with thanksgiving.
With praise and thanksgiving, absolutely. But here, the final part of Psalm 22 is expanded into a narrative of praise. And it's something that doesn't occur in quite the same way elsewhere. It's sort of a lament turned around. Okay? Verses 1 through 21 in Psalm 22 are lament. Why are you so far from me? And then you've got in verses 11 through 19 the plea, be not far from me. Why are you so far from me? Please don't be so far from me. Okay? And then Psalm 22 is unique among the individual psalms of lament in that the introduction includes a review of God's past saving acts. This is usually only found in the communal laments. This is the only one. It's unique. Let's read the first two verses. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? From the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest.
Isn't this part of the Good Friday service?
Yes, it's read on Good Friday. Absolutely. Yep. Think for a moment, and I want you to talk about this. This is the second question or the first actual question at the bottom of the story of Hannah is this discussion question. Supposing the psalmist had started, God, I feel so far from you, I feel so forsaken. How does the use of an opening question strengthen the feeling of the psalm? Why did the psalmist choose to open with a question?
Because
let's talk about it in group so we can have a little bit of interaction, okay?
Well, he's feeling abandoned. What's going on?
Yeah, but if he wasn't the question, it would still be the same.
The question is a way to get
Yeah, what a response.
Yeah.
you just say something, he may not expect a response. If you pose it as a question, you're asking for a response.
I need my.
It's a very long
Oh yeah, that's why it's said on Good Friday, Jesus is saying this on the cross.
But in the context of the early
It seems that when Good Friday it says,
shows an openness, a willingness to the Lord.
It's more direct to God. Yeah, you want to have some direct, you're asking for a dialogue.
Her name is Abraham. And that name was and Sarah was
it also recognizes the superiority of God.
expectations.
I think we can all.
Like I'm asking you.
Oftentimes
Identify.
What do you think, guys? What do you think, people? How does the use of an opening question strengthen the feeling of this psalm?
If you ask a question, you're asking for a response.
Ah, you're demanding a response. Okay. Anything else?
It's a literary device a lot of writers use. You know, when you start anything, starting with a question is a great way to start anything.
I didn't prompt Jackie before the class to say that, but that's exactly right. It engages the reader in a special way. I have something here in the next slide. Take a read and see if you can know where any of these come from.
Is the third one from Martha and Mary?
They're all from the same literary work.
Shakespeare? I was going to say.
Yeah, Shakespeare. And what, is it from a Shakespeare comedy?
Probably either history or tragedy, but it doesn't seem like a comedy. But it could be. Shakespeare is a tricky dude.
Yes.
Sounds familiar to me.
These are the opening lines of the first four scenes of Shakespeare's play, Shakespeare's tragedy, Macbeth. If you've ever read or seen Macbeth, and I've both read it and seen it, I don't think I taught it when I taught high school English. But when shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, or in rain? Those are the three witches. And then the opening of Act 1, Scene 2. What bloody man is that? First words of Act 1, Scene 3. One witch says to another, "Where hast thou been, sister?" And the last one is Act 1, Scene 4. And Macbeth asks, "Is execution done on cawdor?" My point in sharing this is the questions lend a sense of uncertainty and doubt and indecision. These opening words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" are restless words. And a good writer, someone who's putting together quality literature, will use that device of an opening question to draw the reader in. That's what's happening in Psalm 22. All right, next slide. Is that right? Okay. What is the doubt expressed in Psalm 22. What is the doubt expressed in these first two lines?
That God isn't listening.
God ain't listening. And the psalmist complains that God has forsaken him and asks God, why? Why is this happening to me? He's convinced that God does not hear him. Do you think that an answer to this question would somehow lessen his suffering? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why is this happening to me? Why are you doing this? If God said, well, here's why, would that have lessened his suffering?
No.
This, we human beings want the answer to the question why. Without realizing, in most cases, if we had that answer, it wouldn't help us. It would not help us. The psalmist is abrupt with God, and yet he does not cease calling on God and calling God his God, my God, my God. So he's calling God his God. In spite of the complaint, there is a relationship with God. And now I want to turn to the next question, which is at the top of the last page. And it's this. This is a discussion question. What is the relationship? Sorry if this is I don't mean for this to be sort of intellectual or philosophical, but I'm hoping we can uncover some stuff here. What's the relationship between belief and religion? Does a person need to believe to be religious? Does a person need to be religious to believe? This is going somewhere, so
I would say a person
take some. This your discussion questions. Take some time in your small groups.
There's no logical thing. But to be religious to believe, no. Anyone can believe something.
Putting your back this way.
They're not connected, but I think a person needs to believe to be religious.
In other words, if you're going to have a religion, then you have to believe.
Because some things I think can't explain them logically.
But
Well, yeah, I think belief is the key to faith, right? I think of it as faith. And you can certainly struggle with that.
But you can believe in the damn Waldorf Astoria here.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with
No, this does, you have to be religious, believe, no. I think there's two, as you say, they're not connected.
I've listened to people to say, I'm not ready to be religious, I'm still working on the belief part. So, yeah, that's the second one, we agree. The second one is the person needs to be religious. Indeed. I think that's an easy decision. First, but I would say that the first question was to me.
To me, that makes sense to say I'm very spiritual religious, because I feel like I'm
Belief is one of the things you do. That's something whether it's
not something like in
it has to be. You can believe in a lot of things.
And whether it was like to call God God or to call God universe.
And believe in science.
There's something more.
I think there's something living here that gets it out of whack.
And I think, but to believe and be religious, I would say, right, yes, because whether you're a fundamentalist, if you believe every word in this Bible is absolute.
That's what I
Whether
was
it's the word of God, or you're an Anglican and you say, have certain.
So a question, inner and outer,
Yeah.
and
Other things too.
because both can be outward. You could say, "Oh, I believe this," but not deeply, or you can go through the religious procedure and not be anywhere inside.
It's crucial how to die, my doctrine says, we only want to
So we
whether it's
would be atheist in something else. It's particularly related to religion at all. You believe that you are in a religion, but it's not.
But it won't.
And then believe.
Yes, that's what I was. I've known Episcopalians who do not believe that Jesus was the Son of Man. He was just a prophet. They're so involved in the church religiously. And their beliefs change over time. The conversion. So I'm not sure you have to believe to be.
But they believe he was a prophet. I'm not saying they have to believe it.
They don't have to have the right belief.
They don't have to have the saying the right.
What we would say.
Okay.
Have a definition.
Let's see what we came up with. What kind of thoughts? Carol, you said, I'm going to call on you. I'm not necessarily going to call on particular people, but you said something very interesting and provocative. Can you share it with the group?
Well, if I was asked about, my religion, I would probably say I have faith, my faith. That's what I would focus on, truly. And that would help also if people have a question that's quite specific to that area.
The phrase that you used is, I am a person of faith, which is, I think, a different statement than saying, I'm a believer or I'm religious.
Yes.
I'm a person of faith. What did your group come up with over here?
Well, we thought that the answer to the questions was no, because religion is kind of an outside thing. That was your point. Whereas belief is something inside. Religion on the outside is like an organization, a set of practices. But belief is something on the inside of you. You do or you don't believe. People who don't believe can participate in a religion fully, yet they don't believe. You don't have to participate in a religion to truly believe.
That was the point that the 8th century prophets made. You know, you people are doing all the outward stuff, you're making the sacrifices, you're doing this and that, but it's not touching you in the heart. Yeah, good point. What came up in your group over here?
Basically the same thing, that religion is corporate, it's communal, it's ongoing, it's an institution, and faith and belief are things that come from the individual. They're looking for a way to be affirmed or confirmed or participated in or shared, but belief, as you said, that it was a personal relation first.
I like your use of the word relationship. Anything from this group here, guys?
Yeah, I think you do have to have belief or faith. I think of belief and faith as pretty much the same. To be religious, I'm not talking about a religion, I mean a person being religious, you have to have belief or faith. Now the second part, does a person need to be religious to believe? No, you can believe in a lot of things.
I was going to make the point, and again, I hope this is not too philosophical. The word religion, that L-I-G part, is the same root as from which come our English words ligament or ligature. In other words, something that ties something to something else. So religion ties us to God. It ties us to a community. It ties us to a set of precepts and to a set of stories. I found these quotes in a book about the Psalms, and I wanted to ask this question because I think it prepares us for this kind of subtle thing that came up in one of the books I was reading. In this opening of Psalm 22, there's a fundamentally different understanding of humanity's relationship with God from the one that has grown up since the period of the Enlightenment. The idea being that in the Enlightenment, also known as the Age of Reason, those beliefs had to have a certain logical content and needed to be able to be proven scientifically in order to connect us to our religious heritage and our religious convictions. The writer goes on to say, we describe this relationship as belief and equate the term with religion itself. But in a relationship with God viewed as belief, it is the human who is the subject. One either believes in God or not. The writer goes on to say, in the Psalms, it is quite different. There, God is the subject. God is the one who initiates the relationship. So even when a human despairs of God, one can never break free from God. We all know people who claim not to believe. We all claim, we hear people say that they claim that they're religious but not spiritual. God is God. God is present. God is active. We don't need to believe or not believe to effect the reality or change the reality that God is God. And that reality, even in a desperate psalm of complaint, the psalmist never says, well, there's no God. I don't believe. The psalmist says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Anyway, I thought this was very interesting, and I wanted to share it with you because I feel like I'm talking with a group of educated and curious, strong-minded people. Peter, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say Psalm 14. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. All are corrupt and commit them abominable acts, and there is none who does any good. So it's not the psalmist saying it, it's the fool saying there is no God.
Yeah.
So the psalmist is then contrasting that.
Yeah, reporting on that. Yes.
I often say when friends who've known me forever and Christian that they'll say, well, I believe in many gods or whatever. And I say, I know him.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know if I'm over it, but that's how I feel, like I know him.
I think this is a very, I think it's a very strong statement to say, who is the subject and who is the object? And this writer is saying, since the time of the Age of Enlightenment, God has been viewed, or the human has been viewed as the subject, but really, God is the subject. Let's just try to wrap our brains around that. Mary Jane, help us wrap our brains around that.
I'm sitting here thinking, well, what other thing can I imagine that is like God? And if we think of God, just for fun, think of God as the sun that shines on everything, right down to cloudy days. you can say, I don't believe there's a sun. But as you said before, God's the subject, it's there, whether you know it or not. You could be under a bushel and say, well, why have you forsaken me? And the sun is right outside from under the bushel. If you know, God's such a charged word, benevolent and kind and loving and all this. But if we just think of it as light, as just sunshine, it kind of levels the playing field for everything. And religion gets created out of, this is where the sun shines the best. And this is the house that it shines on always.
Yeah.
When in reality, like you said, God is God, constant and forever and without any...
And God initiates the relationship. God initiates the relationship. Okay, now, we're only up to verse 3, but we'll go faster, I promise. Let's read together these verses beginning with verse 3. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. The point, the psalmist cannot escape from God. Yet you. Okay? God is silent. God is at a distance. God seemingly can't be reached. But God is still there. There's nothing apart from God. I'm going to ignore that phone call.
It's God.
There you have it. Okay, very good. Yet the divine holiness is felt as something distant, something alien, something terrifying, something mysterious. God is remote, being enthroned in lofty majesty. Very interesting expression. You are enthroned on the praises of Israel. That is a unique phrase not found anywhere else in the scriptures. What might that mean? I think it means something like this. Whenever God is praised, whenever God is exalted, that is to say, lofty and high above, in these psalms of praise, something unique is recognized about the nature of God. And I say this to contrast with the fact that the gods of the surrounding people were basically humans with a lot more power. The God of Israel was lofty and remote and distant and not human. If you know any of those stories about the Roman or the Greek gods, they were like not nice. I mean, they were filled with jealousy and anger. They abused people. You know, I think I'll turn this woman into a swan, or make this guy look at his reflection in the water for the rest of his life, or roll him a stone up a hill. They were cruel. They were like vengeful. The God of Israel is different, and this is what enthroned on the praises of Israel is all about. Here in verses 4 and 5, God's present remoteness is shown. God has delivered the people from distress in the past, and these former saving acts appear to be far away, yet the psalmist is still able to recall the fact that God has indeed helped God's people. They were saved and were not put to shame. So here, in verses 3, 4, and 5, we're already stepping away from the lament that opened this psalm. Already we're getting some resolution. Already we're getting some change of heart. Here is nobody's favorite verse in the whole Bible. Let's read together, starting with verse 6. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They sneer at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. Like I say, it's nobody's favorite verse. Oh, I'm a worm. I'm not human. Nobody's favorite verse. So even though the psalmist has stepped away from this sense of being abandoned, the suffering has not yet been relieved, but still there's a contrast with what has gone before. Here we have the language of rescue, we have the language of deliverance and salvation when we're talking about let him rescue him. Added to this is a social aspect. He's rejected. He is scorned by others who believe that God has justly punished him. This is why I keep emphasizing it. This notion that, if something bad is happening to you, God is punishing you. That is not a biblical concept. And particularly, it's not a concept in the Psalms of Lament. There's a real danger in that theological approach, that if something bad is happening to you, it's because God is punishing you. What happens with that bad theology? It creates two categories of people, right? Those who are favored by God and those who are outside of God's favor. How does that strike you? Yeah, it's not very godly. Okay, some people are favored by God and some people are outside of God's favor. I don't want to worship and serve that kind of God. I don't want to serve and worship a God who plays favorites.
Why is that in quotes?
Commit your cause to the Lord.
Yeah. 8. It's in quotes. Why is that?
Yeah, I'm going to guess here because I don't know for sure. I think it is that he is the psalmist is possibly quoting what another, advice that another person is giving him. David, what do you think?
That's the crowd. The quote, it's not the speaker, it's the crowd.
The crowd saying, you're being punished for your sin, but if you commit your way to the Lord, things will turn out well. Okay. So things are getting better. Let's go on to the next slide, which is verses 9 and 10. Let's read it together. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth. And since my mother bore me, you have been my God. So let's go on to the next discussion question, because I think this is important to consider. We've only got one after this. So if you're getting tired of discussion, don't worry about it. We're almost done with this part. Do you believe God ever abandons anyone? Under what circumstances might that happen?
I don't think God
Talk in your groups and come up with
I think we may think that he has abandoned us.
Well, we more likely abandon him.
I think we abandon ourselves.
That also.
I would agree with that.
But I also think we may think that God has
Thinking about the whole class, all those good people.
In other words, with abandoned.
What do you got here,
I'm working on that. I think I know where it's from, but I can't find the candle. Where's the candle?
In the back.
Because God is with you. Why are you looking out there?
They hide their hidden now.
It's not easy to find things.
Yeah, the songs are in the back.
That's a hard concept.
they don't fall away every time you go through the cycle.
But just saying that. I'm bad. Well, you're bad, but you're looking at God.
But for the individual.
Your right hand.
I thought maybe it might be in this
Where's the canto?
But for history.
You're within the services of morning prayer and the beginning of
I don't know. Did you say
People say
there's not a section.
A section in
God gives us free choice. We choose to abandon God or abandon, but not God. We're not doing it. We are doing
Everybody crosses the Red Sea, and
There's nowhere to go if he isn't.
it gives the song.
So you can't imagine what's going
Saying things like,
to keep you safe.
Yes.
especially when
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know where it is.
It's about Jesus on the cross.
The reason they drive you crazy chariot drivers.
It's that one.
They didn't save any of the soldiers.
Okay, people,
On the cross.
let's reconvene.
Does God abandon Jesus on the cross?
What do you think? Do you believe God ever abandons anyone?
No.
Peter?
No.
Okay. I thought you were saying something different.
No.
We abandon God. God doesn't abandon us.
And, in a sense, as I was saying, that God is still the even when we abandon God. Okay, so we don't believe that God ever abandons anyone. No circumstances under which that might happen.
I have a doubt. I was thinking of the Holocaust. There's other things you can think of, and it just seemed like the people who were killed, did God abandon them? At that time, evil triumphed, and they lost their lives.
Yeah.
But that's not God abandoning, that's the evil of...
But, I think if I understand the point you're making, Jackie, it fell to a community of, a religious community as if they had been abandoned by God.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't know a whole lot about how, so I'm speaking from very limited experience. If somebody knows better than me, Peter, maybe you know better.
I know better, but go on.
I was going to say, modern Jewish theology, much of it is trying to come to grips with what does this mean? We don't believe that God abandoned us, but what do we believe about this horrendous thing that happened?
So,
How do we make sense of it?
Well, we believe that God doesn't pull all the strings.
right, you have a dog.
And we believe that when bad things happen, God is just as sorry and just as sad about it as we are.
That is such good theology, Ivan. That is such good theology.
So I have two things to say. Eli Wiesel, in his book Night, which is a very small one about the Holocaust, there's a young boy who was, I think he's on the gallows, and the Jews are watching this in a concentration camp, and one of the pupils says, "Where is your God now?" And somebody else in the group says, "My God is there with that young boy who was being lynched." So sort of like Jesus. And the other thing is that you can have a God that's either all-knowing or all-loving. You can't have them both. And we choose to worship a God who's all-loving and not all-knowing. So even in the midst of our suffering, God is loving us through that. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. That's exactly the story that came to my mind. Has anybody else read Night?
Oh, it's such a good
by Elie Wiesel. You've read it, Mary Jane? It's just a stunning book. And it is. It's like, maybe it's 85 pages or something.
Well, I was thinking that we all like to be chosen as the Jewish chosen people, but they don't like feeling like they were abandoned in this Holocaust situation. I'm not professing one thing or the other, it's just speaking to the point that we like it when things are all good, but we don't like it when things are all bad. But that's not the God that we got. We got a God that's there, and our job is to kind of figure out where we are on the map.
Yeah. It's not only the God that we've got, it's the life that we've got.
It's got everything. And if you think of yourself not as God, but as God in you, you cannot deny yourself. You can't annihilate yourself. You cannot abandon yourself. You're with yourself wherever. And if you're in the whole, bad. And if you're in the landscape, pretty. But no, you're all there.
Yeah.
You cannot be apart.
Cynthia?
I was just going to say, we can also think about the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Today, there's 65,000 more dead and homeless. They still believe in God. And God is still with them.
Yes. Yeah. There's a good contemporary example. Thank you. So, the psalmist clings to those personal certainties that remain, his own experience of how God from his birth has preserved and protected him, God's concern shown in what God has done for God's people in the past, thinking back to verses 4 and 5, our ancestors trusted in you. 4 times in these verses there is reference to God being close to the psalmist since the psalmist's birth. God was with him. There's never been a moment throughout any of his existence when God was not with him. And this is the ground of his confidence. As the psalmist recalls what God has done for him from birth, the psalmist finds a firm foothold that enables him to step from lament to the next, which is petition.
Can I just say one thing about this?
Absolutely.
Can you go back just a minute?
Yep.
So this sentiment is also found in my favorite psalm, which is Psalm 139.
Which Veronica was talking about. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to do that at a later date. Okay.
You've heard it twice.
Okay. This is the turning point in the psalm. Let's read this verse together. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. The entire first part of the psalm has been leading up to this petition. Oh, and it'll be repeated later in verse 19. So let's go on. Maybe let's have the gentlemen read the odd-numbered verses and the women read the even-numbered verses, just so we have a different sound. Ladies? They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion.
I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within my breast.
My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me down in the dust of death.
For dogs are all around me, and hungry and evildoers encircles me. They bound my hands and feet.
All my bones, they stare and gloat over me.
They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots.
We don't know who these enemies are, who the enemies of the psalmist are, or why there's such a threat. Obviously, this is metaphorical language. That's why I put bulls and lion and dogs in yellow to point out it's metaphorical language. It's not literal language, okay? For example, ever call anyone a dog? No one's admitting it, but I bet.
Well, yeah.
These enemies are depicted as wild beasts. So, are they his literal physical opponents? Are they, one writer suggests these are sort of demonic forces? Or are they internal voices that are offering this criticism? We don't know. What we do know is it's real. Interestingly, all of a sudden, at the end of verse 16, these bulls and lions and dogs become human evildoers again. So they're not literal animals. And notice, if these are people, they cast lots for my clothing. These are people utterly without pity. You know, I mean, imagine what that would take. I mean, we've heard stories of certain neighborhoods in the U.S. where gang members will assault someone for a particular kind of jacket or particular brand of sneakers that they're wearing. But imagine not only taking them, but then gambling for them. Absolutely without pity.
And don't you think this mirrors when Jesus was on the cross and the soldiers were...
Well, yeah, Psalm 22 is used in telling the story of the crucifixion of Jesus. And a lot of these phrases, particularly, this is what happened... I forget which gospel it's in, where the Roman soldiers are casting lots for Jesus' garment rather than tearing it because it was of good quality, and they didn't.
The book The Robe is all about that, where that robe went after.
I've never read it.
It's old. Peter, do you know, is that The Robe? Isn't that like?
I've heard of it.
It's an old book.
I read it.
Yeah,
it's very powerful.
It was made into isn't it made into a film?
It has been pretty much.
Questions. When the new Christian community began to use this as evidence that this is the Messiah?
Well, remember that
ongoing.
those who wrote the Gospels, and we could get into a long conversation here, and I don't want to get sidetracked, but remember that those who wrote the Gospels were familiar with the Old Testament texts, in particular the Psalms. That was what children learned in synagogue, and particularly from their families. They memorized the Psalms, so it was part of the common heritage. Okay, let's go on. So we've got lament again. Now we're back to petition. Let's try this side from David to Doug, the odd-numbered verses, and the other side, the even-numbered verse, saying together, "But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid.
Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog.
Save me from the mouth of the lion." So here, this petition that we heard back in verse 11 is resumed. And it's a petition for deliverance from distress and deliverance from hostile powers, deliverance from enemies. And I'm starting with the second part of the 21st verse, because this is where the second half of the psalm begins. And we go from lament to praise. Look how in verse 21, there's an abrupt change, okay? "Save me from the mouth of the lion, from the horns of the wild oxen. You have rescued me." Two different ideas kind of sewn together in one verse. From the horns of the wild oxen you have rescued me. This sudden shift is characteristic of psalms of complaint or psalms of lament. In the middle of speaking, the person's appeal has been answered, and now I have been saved. This is like the story of Hannah. She had her psalm of complaint, and then the next year when she goes back, she's got her baby. God answered her, God heard her complaint and answered, changed the lament into praise. Let's read verses 22 through 24 together. I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you.
You fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him.
Stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he did not despise or abhor affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried to him. This part of the psalm reads much more like a psalm of thanksgiving than a psalm of complaint. What's it doing here? What accounts for the sudden change? Well, we don't exactly know. Maybe the psalm speaker says these desperate and unhappy words and then waits, and eventually the priest of the temple offers some oracular word. God has heard your prayer. God will answer you.
Is this like the catharsis in a novel, for example? You go along and go up, and then all of a sudden you go down.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common form in literature. So this word from the priest is one explanation of where the shift comes from. Remember that these are not just literature, they had a function. Other scholars say this may have been like a matching pair, that the first part was complaint and petition at the temple. The psalmist goes home, comes back the next day, the next week, the next year, and feels better, and so recites these words of thanksgiving. The Psalms we have in written form have gone through, and this is important, they've gone through a long process of redaction. That is to say, they've been edited over and over many years, many centuries. And this shift in tone leads to the question, did these two halves always go together? Or did somebody put them together at a later time? We don't know. Jeff?
I think these words echo the Song of Moses, which at that time probably was said every week in a service the way we do the Nicene Creed.
Yeah.
And so this is their corporate song of praise that they're referring to.
Yeah, that is certainly a possibility. Notice one.
Yeah, in 21, I think he's saying, if you help me, I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the congregation, I'll praise you. Maybe 22, etc., is what he would say if God helps him.
And notice that this is a narrative of what God has done. We're going to get more of narrative next week.
I want to echo what Jackie is saying, because in my translation, there's a very clear transition. It says, it doesn't have "you have rescued me." It groups it with the line before it, "Save me from the lion's mouth, my poor soul from the wild bull's horns." So there's a plea there, and then it goes, "Then I shall proclaim your name to my brothers."
And this is,
if you do this, then I will do that.
And you know, what we're talking about here in part is the difficulty of translation.
Yeah.
Hebrew really doesn't have the equivalent of tense the way English or Spanish has verb tense. It doesn't have that. So we don't know exactly, is it a plea to be rescued, or is it, you have rescued me? The point is, there's a clear shift, okay? The story is this psalmist has experienced God's deliverance, and now he's concentrating on the fact that his plea has been heard. Obviously, verse 24 refers back to the beginning, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That accusation is that God has turned away, that God was deaf to his call, has been heard. God has not despised or abhorred or hidden his face, but he heard me when I cried. Maybe the psalmist's purpose is to say, the desperate man is justified in accusing God, provided that it's balanced with a declaration like this. Verse 23 is an imperative. He is calling the whole congregation to praise. It's the most different verse from everything that has preceded and followed. This idea that you who fear the Lord, praise him. This is going to be expanded in the following verses. Let's read. This is something went 22 through 24. Okay, let's go on, starting at verse 25 then. Gentlemen, read 25. Ladies, read verse 26. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear him.
Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May their hearts live forever.
Now, this business about the payment of a vow, some sort of promise for a religious festival in the future, the praise in verse 23 is a praise that's now going to be heard by the great assembly, before whom the one who has lived through these experiences will experience his promise. Verse 26 indicates this festival probably included a sacrificial meal. This is kind of a vulgar way to put it, but it's kind of like going to the temple was going to a barbecue. I mean, you would purchase a bull or a sheep or a goat, and it would be sacrificed on the altar, and then it would be, part of it would be burnt and offered to God, but part of it would be consumed by the person who's making the offering, and part of it, in some cases, would be given to the poor. If you remember the story of Eli, his sons always took the best part of the offering for themselves. And they got into trouble for that, and so did Eli. It's a kind of a horrifying story. But the point is, this is part of the vow that's being made. Okay, I'm going quickly because there's a lot more material and we have very little time, and I want to finish this today. But let's go on and read this promise of praise that beginning with verse 27. Okay, 27, reading together. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. So now the praise goes out from Israel to the whole of the earth. The circle grows wider. This can happen because verse 28 says, dominion belongs to the Lord. This idea of a universal God became very important during the exile. because the Jews associated their God with a particular place, the temple. And when the temple was destroyed and the people were taken into exile in Babylon, they had to figure out, where is God in all this? What is the meaning of this? God's kingly rule embraces all nations came to be their answer to that question. The praise of God, in other words, grows from this one person to the whole nation of Israel to the whole world. So God's sufferer hears a plea from the depths of despair. That plea moves to his promise to recount his experience to others, and then from that small group, the praise of God goes forward to ever wider circles. Okay. This does not what slide number is? Oh, this is the last slide. Okay. Let's read verses 29 through 31 and finish together. To him, indeed, shall all who in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust. And I shall live for him. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it. So in these closing verses, in the same way, praise grows, but it grows, instead of growing geographically, it grows from the past to the present and now into the future. With great daring, the psalmist even looks beyond death. Remember that in traditional Old Testament Judaism, there really was not a sense of an afterlife. But here, the psalmist is looking past that conviction and saying, even beyond death, God will be praised. Coming generations are going to learn of God's marvelous act, which then must be proclaimed from parent to child to a people yet unborn. If you know anything about Judaism, you know how important the transmission of the faith from generation to generation is. Lots of times Christians will, did this happen to anybody in this group? They'll send their kids to Sunday school, and the parents will stay home and have a second cup of coffee on Sunday. And it happened to you, maybe? Yeah, I mean, that would not happen in Judaism. You learn the faith from your family, not from the Sunday school teacher. I'm glad it stuck, Carol. The interesting thing, it concludes with this line saying that he has done it. Here again, a word about translation. We don't know exactly what these words mean. If you look in your version of whatever you're reading, whatever Bible translation, it might say, he has done it, he has made it, he has wrought it. Even God does what he says. God does what he says. So the point is, God has acted. In those three words, God has acted. That is Old Testament theology in a phrase. God has acted. We don't have the time to take this as a discussion question, but let's look at the last one. If God has acted is all of Old Testament theology, How would you summarize God's act? What would you include on the list of what God has done, how God has acted? What would you include in that list?
Creation.
Creation.
I like 29, where even the people who have slept in the earth will bow down.
Okay, but what I'm trying to get at is the story. What's in the story that tells us what God's acts are? Creation is one of those.
Getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden.
Getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, yeah.
Noah's Ark story.
What's that?
Noah's Ark story.
Yeah, story of Noah's Ark. What else is? In what other ways has God acted?
Deliverance in Egypt
of the Israelis
from Egypt, absolutely.
Well, he took on a human body and came here to hang out with us.
But that's I'm talking Old Testament theology. In Old Testament theology, we have creation, the ejection from the Garden of Eden. We have the story of deliverance from slavery. Okay, all of these are stories of God's action, and in those three words, God has acted. Okay, that is the summary of Old Testament theology. And only because the psalmist has experienced God's remoteness and God's silence could he experience this reversal. He had to recount the whole story. It is because of God's action in the Old Testament, it is because of God's actions that Old Testament theology speaks. And in doing so, it speaks of the divine-human relationship, past, present, and future. So that's why I wanted to spend so much time on Psalm 22. It's got the whole thing. So next week we will do something different. We'll do Psalms of Praise, or maybe we'll do Psalm 139. I thank you for your attention. What an inspiring group you are. I always leave Mondays feeling energized and grateful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget the 4th at 5 and the 5th at 4.
That was really good.
That was cool.
Yeah.